Ladies and gentlemen, there's few industries in South Africa that are as important as the private security sector, specifically because the South African police force, doesn't actually work. Now, the private security sector is currently going through let's call it a scandal. That will be the easiest way to describe it. But before we get onto the main video of today, can I yet again ask you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. Click the bell icon and join the channel. Anyway, let's get on to it. So what's actually going on? Well, SIRA, also known as the Private Security Industry Regulator, oversaw a 130 million UIF-funded training program, which launched in 2019. Now, the program was meant to last for 6 months, but dragged on for 5 years. I mean, many such cases of this occurs in South Africa, pretty frequently, does it not? Now, the intention of the program was to train 7,071, I don't know where the 71 came from, unemployed South Africans in security qualifications. Now, of that, only 118 learners were actually formally accredited in 2024, despite 6,507 having been enrolled. Now, for the privilege, 30 million rand was paid upfront to a supplier before the contract was even rendered. The Auditor General flags serious failures in contract management, oversight and accountability, with tablets and other promised equipment never actually having been delivered. Now, a forensic report on the program was assessed and altered by 2 officials without authorization, both of whom have now been suspended. And this has prompted Ian Cameron to call the entire thing into question. And in response, in typical response in South Africa, SIRA alleged that Ian Cameron should recuse himself from his committee chair position due to posts that he made on social media highlighting the issues. Now, the reason Ian had to go to social media to highlight the issues is because in typical fashion, when you highlight these things in South Africa, to the broader population, these things never actually make the light of day. Now, luckily, the Parliamentary Police Portfolio Committee unanimously rejected the request for Ian to recuse himself. That doesn't stop the fact that SIRA attempted to silence Ian. So in response, the committee has recommended the suspension of SIRA's director and CFO, with Ian Cameron suggesting that the ongoing mismanagement was inexcusable, with many calling for the entire board to be replaced due to its denial, inaction, and lack of transparency. Least of all, the actual attempt to cover it up. But yet again, what we're actually seeing here is yet another public fund, which was wasted and squandered. Now, these type of squandering of public funds are the reason that nobody has any form of confidence in any of South Africa's public institutions. Now, while Ian Cameron has suggested that Parliament's role should have no fear, no favour, and no prejudice, and SIRA needs to be held to account, there are noticeable concerns, and that is, usually in these type of instances, the easiest way to hold people to account is to actually disband the body. So could you imagine in South Africa with a private industry body, SIRA is basically scrapped? What would take its place? Would anything take its place? And let us not forget that at the moment, the private security sector is currently going through a potential bill amendment that would curtail its use of firearms. So this is not really a good look for the regulator. However, the mismanagement of funds is just another day in South Africa. At least that's my opinion. So on then to the next news story. And this is the news story that Solidarity intends to file a complaint with the International Labour Organization, the IOL, against the South African government. And this comes on the backdrop of the South African government's breach of the 2023 race law settlement, which they ratified in the courts in October 2023. And for those of you who don't recall, what happened was upon the passing of the BEE Amendment Bill, Solidarity agreed an amendment to that bill that was ratified in court, and obviously that entire thing has now been ignored. It's been ignored. The breach itself stems from the employment equity regulations, which were published in April 2025. Now, those regulations, Solidariteit alleges, ignored the agreement that affirmative action must be nuanced, and that the regulations themselves fail to ensure that other factors other than race are considered. They also allow for possible retrenchments due to race-based targets, which the agreement with Solidariteit said would be prohibited. So this is now escalating the issue to international attention, with human rights violations being cited. Now, the actual organization, Solidariteit, has launched a 7 million rand legal fund to fight the race-based laws locally and abroad. So you can let me know what you think of that in the comments section below. So then, on to the next topic around human rights abuses in South Africa. And this specifically comes against the backdrop of obviously farm murders in South Africa. As you will recall, Donald Trump confronted Cyril Ramaphosa in the White House on the 21st of May, showing him videos and news clippings of alleged farm murders and general crime statistics in South Africa. Now, according to some analysts, Donald Trump's move highlighted the government's failure to address South Africa's violent crime crisis, with 6,953 murders occurring just in the last quarter of 2024, which equated to 76 murders a day. Now, the conviction rate for the period of 2019 to 2022 was just over 12%. I mean, that's shocking. That's like 1 in 10 people are actually convicted for the murders that they commit, which has led Frans Cronje to suggest that South Africa's homicide rate far exceeds the global average. And it does. It really does. South Africa's homicide rate is 40 per 100,000 individuals, and the global average is like 4, which means that we are 4 times more likely to be killed in South Africa than any other country. That is shocking. Now, in typical fashion, the actual reason for this is state failure and corruption. Yeah. Many such scenarios. I mean, read all the other articles we just talked about. But you see, while this is actually now all becoming really important, is that according to COSATU, remember COSATU on part of the government with the ANC, the violent crime that we're all alleging actually mostly affects Black rural communities. Because as Trump suggested, the farmers in South Africa were well white. But according to these individuals, no, they're not. They are Black. You see, you cannot suggest that Blacks are not farmers, as we've all heard. So why is this really, really important? Because according to the latest news article, there are more Black than white farmers in South Africa. And so when you take into account farm murders, it stands to reason that actually, if you look at it, it's the Black individuals being murdered, not a white genocide. But you see, this type of data, this type of claim is highly, highly problematic for all of the political reasons that these individuals do not want to talk about. Let us not forget, we are frequently assured that the majority of the farmland in South Africa are white hands. Remember, that's why we need to take back the land. We need to give us the land. But now we're told that actually more Blacks than whites are farmers? So where is this misinformation occurring from? Also, Black farmers only produce 10% of the actual food output of South Africa, which means one has to then ask why that is the case. If the data from 2016 shows that there are 93,000 Black commercial farmers, as is alleged here, versus the 43,000 white farmers, then we have to ask the question, why only 10% of the food output comes from the Black farming community? And one also then has to ask the question as to why we are frequently told that actually Black individuals do not own farms in South Africa. It's all in white hands. So this is what happens when you start trying to use fake data to constantly make political claims. Because now you've got a problem. Either farm murders are occurring against white Afrikaners because they have the land, or they not occurring against the white Afrikaners because they're not the majority of the farmers, in which case there's no land to give back. Yeah, you see, this is a real problem for you guys, because this shows that the actual incomplete and misinformation that's occurring is you. You're the one who's causing misinformation, and it's all being done for political end goals. But what we can take from all of these articles is that the race quotas, the affirmative action, the land ownership and the farm ownership narratives that are constantly pushed by the ANC are all coming to a head. We've got the BE Amendment Acts going to the international bodies. We've got farm murders and land ownership patterns in South Africa being highlighted internationally, with many of the ANC's suggestions showing that actually the ANC lacks any form of credibility. And that's the actual upshot of all of this. The ANC and their ability to govern in South Africa is damaged in terms of its credibility. Nobody believes it when it comes through to crime, land, and racial injustice statistics and allegations. And this is because, by and large, the government uses flawed and incomplete information. Its policies are just racially discriminatory, and violent crime in South Africa is rampant and unresolved. So, what does this actually all mean for us? Well, you've got the G20 here, and this is meant to help us get investments in South Africa. But all of this is going to cause global harm in terms of the perception as to how South Africa is actually viewed, specifically from Western democracies, the very countries that usually invest in Africa themselves. In any case, these are just my views. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.